Paul Krashoc served in the United States Army from 1966 until 1974. His experience in the armed forces during the Vietnam War led him to discouraging his daughter Darlene from following in his footsteps and enlisting in the Army after she graduated high school in 1985. His wife Betty Lou, fearing for Darlene's safety, also tried to talk her out of enlisting. However, Darlene was very headstrong and was determined to follow through with her plans. She did join the Army, and in 1987, she was stationed at Fort Carson in Colorado. She had achieved the rank of specialist and was assigned to the 73rd Maintenance Company. On March 16, 1987, 20-year-old Darlene and several other members of her unit went out to Shuffles, a club on South Academy Boulevard in Colorado Springs that was popular with soldiers from Fort Carson. The group spent the evening dancing and having a few drinks together. Because they had work the next morning, most of the group went home early that night, but Darlene stayed later than the rest of her friends. The last known sighting of Darlene was sometime between midnight and 1 a.m., when a witness saw her leave the club. At approximately 5:20 that morning, March 17, 1987, 2 police officers were conducting early morning business checks. Near the dumpster in the alley behind the Korean Club restaurant, they discovered a woman's body. The woman was nude, save for her gray pants, which were pulled down to her ankles, and one sock. She had a black rope around her neck and a wire hanger around her head. The officers found a driver's license nearby, and it identified the woman as Darlene Krashoc. The location where she was found was on the same road as Shuffles, approximately a mile south of it. Authorities did not believe that the alley was the site of the crime. Rather, they believed that Darlene's body had just been left there. Darlene had been severely beaten, but her autopsy would show that she had died as a result of strangulation. She had also been sexually assaulted. According to those who knew Darlene, she had a heart of gold and was willing to provide help to anyone who needed it. No one could provide investigators with leads about anyone who would have wanted to hurt her, or any potential motives for her murder. She was well liked in her community, and had a close group of friends, but no known enemies. She had not gotten into any sort of argument or altercation with anyone at the club the last night she was alive that could have escalated into violence. Army CID and the Colorado Springs Police Department interviewed hundreds of people, both soldiers and civilians. They identified a handful of persons of interest, but were unable to make any arrests, and the case ultimately went cold. While they were unable to pinpoint an exact motive for the crime, investigators did speculate, based on the last phone conversation Darlene had with her mother, that her death may have had something to do with the Army. Just weeks before her death, Darlene was excited about her future in the Army and the opportunities it was providing for her future. However, when she spoke to her mother on the phone a week before her murder, Darlene was upset about something that was going on at Fort Carson and wanted to get away from the installation. She told her mother that she could not explain to her why she was so upset at that time. The Krashoc family worked hard on their own investigation into Darlene's case and on keeping her story in the public eye. In 1996, they came to Colorado Springs to distribute flyers asking for information in Darlene's voice. I was only 20 years old. They took my dignity, my pride, and my jacket. Then, without mercy, they took my life. If you know something and think it's insignificant, you're mistaken. It's probably the missing link. Betty Lou and Paul Krashoc investigated similar crimes from all over the world, filling up their home office with files and newspaper clippings. As the original investigators retired or were reassigned, the couple would call their replacements to make sure that they knew about their daughter and were working on her case. They kept Darlene's picture with them in their Bible. Darlene's case was reopened several times in hopes that new technology would finally identify her killer. In 2004, DNA from an unknown male was identified on several pieces of evidence and on several areas of Darlene's body. Originally, only a partial DNA profile was identified from this evidence, but in 2016, a much stronger profile was isolated. Unfortunately, no match to this profile was found in local or federal databases. That same year, the DNA evidence was submitted to 2 different laboratories for further testing. It was sent to the United States Army Criminal Investigation Laboratory for Y-STR analysis, which focuses specifically on the Y chromosome. The evidence was also sent to Parabon Nanolabs that December. Parabon used their snapshot DNA phenotyping program to create an image of what the contributor of the DNA may have looked like at the time of the murder, and in 2016, based on his DNA. They had no way of knowing the perpetrator's actual age, so they had to assign one. The images were generated to show the unknown male in his mid-20s, as he may have been in 1987, and in his mid-50s, as he may have been at the time the images were created. These images were released to the public in March of 2017, but despite the offer of a $10,000 reward from the Army, no one came forward correctly identifying the man in the images. In early 2019, Army CID and the Colorado Springs Police Department asked Parabon to submit the DNA profile to GEDmatch, an online genetic genealogy database, and try to use genetic genealogy to identify their suspect. Using this method, Parabon was able to identify several distant relatives of the individual who had left his DNA at the scene. The closest relatives were a woman and her daughter living in Wisconsin, and another woman living in Texas. These women were believed to have a 6th to 9th degree relationship to the contributor of the DNA profile being investigated, meaning they could be as closely related as second cousins once removed, or as distantly related as fourth cousins. By constructing the family trees of the relatives found in the GEDmatch database and comparing them, Parabon was able to narrow down what branch of their family they shared with the unknown male. Parabon was then able to identify a potential suspect found in all of their family trees who would have shared the same amount of DNA as the person with the DNA profile from the crime scene. That suspect was 58-year-old Michael David Whyte. Whyte had served in the Army from October of 1979 until April of 1998, working as a signal operations manager. He had been stationed at Fort Carson from September of 1986 until August of 1987. After leaving the Army, Whyte went to work for CenturyLink. He worked there for the next 2 decades, and eventually he rose to the position of senior network engineer. In 2019, he was living in Thornton, Colorado, just north of Denver, with his wife. He had no criminal record. On May 20th, 2019, 2 detectives went to Whyte's residence and saw him get into his car. They then followed him to work. Later that day, they followed him as he left work on his lunch break and went to a nearby fast food restaurant. There, they watched him drink from a cup as he ate his meal. When Whyte left the restaurant, leaving the cup behind, the 2 detectives collected it in hopes that a DNA sample could be taken from it. They also surreptitiously swabbed the door handle of Whyte's car as another potential source of his DNA. Testing showed that Michael Whyte's DNA matched that found at the crime scene. On June 13th, 2019, 32 years after Darlene Krashoc's murder, he was arrested at his home and taken into custody on a no-bond warrant. He is being charged with first-degree murder after deliberation, first-degree felony murder, and aggravated first-degree sexual assault. Whyte's wife told local reporters that her husband is innocent of the charges against him, and that their entire family is shocked by his arrest. Darlene's parents traveled to Colorado from their home in West Virginia to attend Michael Whyte's first appearance in court shortly after his arrest. The appearance was only about 5 minutes long, but the trip was still worth it for the Krashocs. They returned to Colorado for a preliminary hearing in the case on October 25th, 2019. Paul and Betty Lou have pledged to make the trip to Colorado for every one of Michael Whyte's court appearances. The Krashocs are hoping that after 32 years of freedom, Whyte will live long enough to serve 32 years in prison. He had his probation. Now it's time to do his time, Paul told Fox 21 News. I would just tell him that I feel sorry for his mother, Betty Lou said in the same interview. He took my life away from me when he took Darlene, so I can only imagine what his mother feels, knowing what he did. Michael Whyte is currently being held at the Criminal Justice Center in Colorado Springs, and his next court appearance is scheduled for February 18th, 2020.